Hey, let's set up a fresh new Intune tenant for cloud-only devices. First, we're going to need to talk about licenses, and if you like most organizations, you'll use Office 365 for email, and so you probably have Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, or maybe even perhaps Microsoft 365 Business Premium. These all include everything you need to manage devices via Intune. If you don't, and if for some reason you're trying to build your own license bundle for Intune capability, well, firstly, that's a very expensive way to do it. And Microsoft make it very expensive to buy licenses separately. So you'd save a lot of money if you used a bundled license like the ones I mentioned earlier. But for completeness, just to let you know what you actually would need to buy, to get the best experience when managing Windows devices via Intune, you'd need, unsurprisingly, an Intune license, specifically the Intune Plan 1. You'd also need an Entra ID Plan 1 license at least, maybe Plan 2 if you're doing some of the advanced stuff, but the minimum would be Plan 1. That used to be called Azure Active Directory Plan 1. So you'd need one of those, and that allows you to do automated enrollment and conditional access and other stuff that we rely on for it to be a nice experience for end users. Let's jump into configuring the portal on the Intune side. So you can see I've got this fresh new tenant. There are no devices. In fact, I'll just skip through this guide. There are no devices at all. I haven't set anything up yet, but if I go to tenant administration, you can see I've got 17 licensed users, so I have actually got the license. I think it's a developer license, but it's enough for Intune, and I've got a total of 25 of those licenses. So that's what I've assigned to my users. Now, to actually get device enrollment working, I'll show you where we go for that. We'll choose devices. I'm going to scroll down and get rid of... Actually, we have enrollment here. So if I choose enrollment in the device onboarding section, we have a feature here called automatic enrollment. And that is where we configure Windows devices to enroll automatically when they join or register with Azure Active Directory. And that really is very useful because it means we don't need to join a device to Entra ID and then enroll them to Intune. We can do it all in one step. And that feature is called automatic enrollment. And at the moment, you can see the MDM user scope for that is set to none. And that's not really going to help. That's going to mean it doesn't work for all of my users that I'm enrolling. So we should choose some. If we're piloting this, we could choose some and type in the name of a group of users that we want to use this feature. But remember, when you roll it out to everyone, remember to change that. Or we could choose all. Now, all is where I'm going to set it for me. It's a lab environment, but also I really don't want to forget which group I've used and test a user that hasn't got the MDM user scope assigned to them. And then scrolling down, we have Windows Information Protection. I'm not using Windows Information Protection as part of this demonstration or as part of this lab at all. And so I'm going to set it to none, because if you set it to all, there can sometimes be some conflicts when if a user tries to access some corporate information via a Windows computer, it could either make them enroll or it could make them use Windows Information Protection. And if we're not using WIP, then we don't want to force them to use WIP. So I'm going to leave it as none, so just do it easier. And then we'll choose save. And that's done. So now whenever I enroll a device, whenever I join a device to Entra ID or register a device to Entra ID, it will automatically try to enroll that device, which is fantastic. So, let's talk about enrolling a machine. When we talk about enrollment, that means taking control of the management interface for that device from whichever existing management interface is doing it. So if it's Active Directory, using group policy, there's an MDM provider, an MDM channel that you can use for management, and you could enroll a device to Intune that was previously using group policy. It would still be using group policy afterwards as well, but there'd be some kind of conflict going on if you tried to manage the same settings. We'll talk about that later. So that's enrolling, but we also have config manager in there as well, so that gets a little bit more complicated. For this, we're assuming that these devices aren't managed by Active Directory and they aren't managed by config manager. They're cloud only. But even in that cloud-only scenario, when it comes to cloud-only machines, we have two types. We've got those that are built already, and have Windows on them and a user logged in with admin, and those that are not built, or maybe they're at the out-of-box experience screen. So we can think of these as the existing device scenario and the new device scenario. Both of them need to work, but let's look at the existing device scenario first. So I'm going to take a look at one of my users. This user here will find a user, let's do Adele Vance. Now, I happen to remember the password for Adele Vance, one of my test users, so that's good. I'm going to enroll. I just check she's got a license actually first before we do that. So we're going to manage licenses. So she has an E5 developer license, which means she has Intune. Just scroll down to find it. Entra ID P1, that's a good start, and Intune Plan 1. So we're good to go with the licensing. Let's take a look at a machine. So let's say she uses this machine over here, client 3. I'm just going to log into it. Now, normally she logs in as a user called admin with a password that is local to that machine. And just log in as administrator now. So that's her logged in. Now, normally she doesn't have internet access. Let's just check if internet access is working or if that is a red herring. No, doesn't appear to be working. So I'm going to go back to this lab that I've just built. You might have seen my previous video about it. I'm going to check which network adapter is using. Using CorpNet. Okay, that's fine. Let's look at the gateway in that case and see what network adapter the gateway is using. And that is using CorpNet. And then we got HomeNet. That's wireless. So is wireless up and running there? Let's check that. So I'm not on wireless. Let me just connect to my wireless and that will solve that problem. Perfect. Okay. So back over to this machine. Retest Google. Perfect. Okay. So we have internet. Excellent. So now this user, Adele, needs to enroll her device. So we can go to Start, click Settings, and then down to Accounts, and choose Access Work or School, and then we can just choose Add a Work or School account. So it's Adele, I think that's her email address, at lastcoffee.onmicrosoft.com. So I've typed that in, but also it says you can join this to a local Active Directory domain instead, which is the traditional AD, right? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about traditional AD. So I'll choose Next, and it looks for the organization based on the end of that username, the lastcoffee.onmicrosoft.com. Now you will probably have a custom domain like lastcoffee.co.uk, for example, or lastcoffee.com. But I haven't set that up for this yet because I'm still building this lab environment for the live courses on the Help and Shield Academy. So let's type in Adele's password. Almost typed it in plain text there. And at the moment, because this is a fairly new tenant, Adele's never signed in, it's asking for multi-factor authentication to be set up. I'm going to choose Ask Later so that I don't get stuck at this stage. I'm going to choose Yes to stay signed in, and we'll see what happens. So it's registering the device and applying the company policy, and it'll take a few minutes, but other than that, that's all done. All the user needed to do was type in that. Now you can see it's managed by Last Coffee. If I choose Info, scroll down a little bit, you can see its last sync was successful. So that's them now connected to this device. So as you can see, by choosing Connect and typing in the username and password of this box here, we have connected this computer to Adele Vance MDM. So last coffee MDM, we buy the user called Adele Vance. And that meant that this machine is now managed by MDM, but it's still a local administrator. She still needs to log in as administrator and then the password, that local admin. It's not going to change how Adele logs into this machine. So next, we're going to figure out how we can actually join this machine to Entra ID so that Adele can log in directly to the computer with her Azure AD and Entra ID credentials. So that's what happens if we try to directly enroll a device through add work or school account without getting it into Azure AD or Entra first. But what about if you did want to get this device into Entra, instead of logging in with administrator as the username or whatever the username is on that local machine, if you want to actually log into this device as the user's Entra ID name? It's actually pretty straightforward. Let's take a look. So I'm going to head back over to my hypervisor, which is this one here, and I've got a new machine, this one, client 4. So you remember client 3 was the one that we made MDM, managed by MDM enrolled by enrolling it directly. Let's take a look what happens if we do this differently. So I'm going to go to Start and go to Settings. And in Settings, I'm going to scroll down to Accounts. Oh, actually, it's in there, Accounts. And then I'm going to scroll down to Access Work or School. Now, what we're going to choose is Connect. And then right at the bottom, rather than typing in the email address here like we did last time, I'm going to scroll down and you've got join this device to Entra ID or join to a local Active Directory domain. We don't want to do the AD. That's not cloud only, right? If we do join to Entra ID, that will join it to Azure Active Directory, now known as Entra ID. So let's try that. I'm going to choose that. And yeah, I'm going to log in. The user was Adele at last coffee. And the password, I remember, was this. I got it right. Now, you will probably have MFA enabled in your environment. You should, certainly. I haven't got that set up yet. You saw that earlier on. I will do it, but just not yet. So I'll choose Ask Later. I've got 14 days, right? And this is a demo environment. We are asked to make sure that this is our organization because we're going to join this device to the organization. Now, from a user perspective, that's pretty important, but from an admin perspective, that's also really important that we make sure only authorized users can join devices to Azure AD, and we'll talk about that later on. For now, I'm going to choose Join, and what happens then is the device will actually join Entra ID. It'll make us restart because we need to log in as the new user, well, the existing user, but log in as the new profile on this device. And because we've set automatic MDM enrollment, it will enroll the device into Intune. So we'll see client 4, HYD client 4, on the Intune portal when we jump over there. Right, so it says when you're ready to use this new account, select Start, select the current account picture, choose Switch Account. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So close that down, choose Administrator. Now we don't have Switch Account. Interesting. I'm going to restart it. Okay, that's done. Now you'll notice, let me just double click on that so it goes full screen. Try that again so it actually goes full screen. It's not going full screen, that's weird. Make that full screen, that full screen. Okay, you'll see at the bottom here. See at the bottom here, we've got other user. Now this is where we can log in as Adele Vance with that Entra ID. So Adele V at lastcoffee.onmicrosoft.com. So now the user is logging in directly into the account on Entra ID on their machine. It won't take too long, but you'll see that Adele Vance is now specified as the name, which it's picked up from Entra. Isn't showing the account picture right now, but it might do in the future. Oh, there you go, right at the bottom there. It shows the Adele Vance picture. That is what Adele looks like in real life, I'm sure. But yeah, that's all done. Now let's see if we have the device MDM managed. And we can see that, as we saw before, scroll down to, actually, once again, let's go to accounts. We'll scroll down to access work or school. And it says connected to Last Coffee's Entra ID. And it says managed by Last Coffee. And we've got the info button, which means the enrollment has already taken place. And that's done as well, just by joining the device to Entra ID. So we've improved the user experience by allowing them to log in directly using their normal credentials. We've improved the security and management by automatically joining it to MDM. Now, you'll see this sync. You don't need to click sync. It will sync in normal lifetime, in the normal life of this device, it'll sync approximately every 8 hours. But just after enrollment, it'll sync like every 30 minutes, and then every hour, and then every 2 hours, then every 6 hours, and eventually every 8 hours, so that it gets progressively less intensive on the sync, but it does pull down the latest information quicker. So that we don't need to choose sync, it will do that over time. So we can leave that now, that's already enrolled. Now, we didn't push any settings or configurations or apps or anything like that, so nothing's really going to happen. There's some security policies that have applied, but I didn't push those that I'm aware of, so we'll take a look in the portal and see what has happened there. Let's just, before we move on, take a look at one of the benefits of doing an Entra ID join on this machine. So I'm going to go to the Edge browser here, and you can see it's already said that we can sign in using Adele Vance at lastcoffee.onmicrosoft.com. I'm going to choose confirm continue without signing into Google. It's annoying, isn't it? And so we're signed in to Edge using Adele Vance, which is great. But one of the benefits of that is that I can go to portal.office.com and it'll sign me in automatically without me having to type in a password. I've typed the password once. You saw that single sign-on all the way through to Office, and I can get my email by just heading to Outlook, and you'll see when it gets here, after a few seconds, loads Outlook, and you get all the information in Outlook that you would get. So single sign-on, fantastic feature, and that's how we join a device to Entra ID and also automatically MDM enroll it at the same time with that single user action of clicking that button. And that's one way to enroll a device into Entra ID, to join a device to Entra ID and enroll a device to MDM, is to get the user to do it. It's probably not the best way, and in fact probably the best way is to use autopilot. If you've got a device that hasn't actually gone through the user experience, the out-of-box experience yet, use autopilot. That will be the best experience for you. But this does work, and I guess one of the only major problems with this is that you'll see, if I was to choose down here and choose Windows PowerShell admin and run this as admin, you can see I do have admin as this Entra ID user, which it is a big deal. We don't want standard users to have admin on their machine because they can do disastrous things, and even worse, any malware on their device can do even more disastrous things because they've got admin. So we want to remove that as soon as we can. But thankfully, we can use Entra to remove that, Intune technically, to remove that as devices come online. We can manage the local administrators group and empty it and just have our own local admin password solution user in there if we need to. Talk about that later on. So that's us pretty much finished with this device, which is really, really simple. That's great. So we'll head back over to Intune then and find this device in all devices in the Intune Admin Center. Just close this down. You can see I've got client 3, which is a personal device because I took a personal device. It wasn't corporate owned, and I did an MDM enrollment on it just by typing in my email address in the connect button. That's going to consider this to be a personal device. On the other side, we have client 4, which was enrolled as part of a auto MDM enrollment because we registered the device first. So it's really a corporate device. If a user's gone to the trouble of joining your Entra ID, that's really a corporate device. we probably shouldn't allow users to join devices that aren't corporate. Anyway, you can see this hasn't quite yet picked up the OS version or the last check-in time, but it will come. There it is. So, and I have actually updated this device as well, but that's not anything important. Now, whilst this is personal, if that's been picked up incorrectly, we can change that. We can just go into Client 3 there and choose Properties and change that from device ownership to be personal. We change that to corporate. Now, there are just a couple of differences when you do choose corporate versus personal. Actually, it says it right there. It collects more information from the device if you choose corporate, such as app inventory, for example. So if I just choose acknowledge and then scroll to save, that'll all be done. It's now a corporate device according to Intune, but it doesn't actually change anything on the device at all except the amount of information it collects. It's great. Okay, so back to all devices. Those are my devices. Now, I don't want to go too deep in how to actually make changes on devices with device configuration and apps deployment, but I'll just quickly show you. On the left-hand side here, we're in this devices blade, and then we have configuration, compliance. Those are the main two things that you're going to be using to actually affect change on the device. Aside from that one, I'll open this up. You might be using endpoint security because that's the right place to push security configurations to your devices, and applications. So apps, apps is a huge deal, right? Every computer needs apps and you don't want users to have to install them themselves. I'm obviously going to talk about apps and endpoint security and devices, but it's going to be a different video. In fact, I'm building this lab environment for the course I'm creating on the Alpenshield Academy. So it'll all be put together in a nice package on the Alpenshield Academy. It'll have a nice course and have all the scripts and stuff that I'm using there in case you want to follow along. But for now, I'm going to skip over these and then build separate videos for those particular elements and really make them full, complete videos just about a particular topic, just so it's easier to follow. So I think that's all I want to show you with the enrollment side of things and getting devices into Intune from a cloud-only perspective. Next, we do need to talk about hybrid, because hybrid is very important. And there's a few types of hybrid, right? We've got hybrid Entra ID, we've got hybrid config manager Intune, that's called co-management. So hybrid's an overused word, and we want to make sure that we understand why we need hybrid, why it's a good idea for most organizations to have a hybrid Entra ID environment. It's a bad idea to have hybrid autopilot, but we'll cover that in the autopilot section when we go through that. A lot of people have fallen out with me over the fact that I say don't do hybrid autopilot, but don't do hybrid autopilot, right? And we'll talk about that later. So yes, the next thing we're going to talk about is how and why to use Intune for hybrid devices, moving from things like group policy. That's where most organizations are. They're in group policy land, they're in Active Directory, and we're going to manage them via Intune in the future. So I'll see you either in the Alpenshield Academy, see me there, on a live course or an on-demand course, or I'll see you over on YouTube in a little while. See you next time.